So I had chapter 29, plant diversity, and it was basically just how plants colonized land. And so the earth wasn't always green, and about like 500 million years ago they estimated that the plants finally started coming onto land. And how they knew that was by these little spore fossils right here. They basically just carbon dated those, and now there are more than 290,000 known plants on Earth. And so our land plants are closest relatives of these chlorophytes, which is like green algae, and then all our plants with chlorophytes included are all like have a common ancestor with red algae. And so this is also kind of like how they knew that everything was connected, was that they looked at the DNA, and I think that's the next slide. Oh yeah, so how they knew that chlorophytes and land plants were the same was they looked at the rings of cellulose synthesized proteins, and both have these. And what this does is it creates like the structure for plant cells, like the cell wall itself. That's what these things created, and they looked and they saw they were kind of the same. A structure of flagellated sperm, and this is basically the sperm structures match, so like the way the plant sets it up, and formation of the this word right here, phragmoplast, yeah, and the plant cell's specific structure that forms during late cytokinesis. It serves as a scaffold for the cell plate assembly and subsequent formation of new cells and wall separating the two daughter cells. That's the direct definition from the book, and it was kind of emphasized, so I wrote it down. And so they also have alternation of generations, and basically this means it's like it first starts its life as a haploid, as a gametophyte, and then its second half of its life is as a sporophyte, which are like your ferns and things. I can go back, but yeah, and I'll touch back on what these things mean, because it goes from like basically you're like spore, which is it could fertilize by itself, to needing to pollinate with another plant in this half. And so one thing that our plants developed was the wall spores produced in the Sporgana. So basically, it was like the spores now have a wall, so elements can't don't kill them off fast. And sorry, I did this really late last night, so I'm just trying to remember what I was writing. The sporophyte produces spores in the organs called the Sporgana, which that's where the spores are made yet. And diploid cells called sporocytes undergo meiosis to generate haploid spores. And, so basically, like this would be where your spores are at and everything produced in it. And these are all the spores with the walls on them. Gametites are produced within organs called the gamneta, or gametangia, and female gametangia is called archegonian, produce eggs and are site of the fertilization. And so male gametes called anthrorita produce and release the sperm. So it'd be like these right here would be your female ones, and so they would get pollinated by these male ones. And so the apical can't talk to their meristems, and so the plants sustain continual growth in their like apical mission. So basically they just continue to grow outwards and upwards with their roots and leaves to collect more O2 or CO2 and water and nutrients. Is basically what this does. And so it's like on a plant, if you ever see it, where it stems up from the leaves and it's got that little ball. Basically, that's what this is called, is the apical shoot, and then it's in the same thing in the roots. And so that's what they're talking about. And this is just a close-up of one looks like. And so land plants grouping, land plants can be informally grouped based on the presence or absence of vascular tissue. And most plants have vascular tissue. These constitute the vascular plants, and non-vascular plants are commonly called bryophytes. And bryophytes are not a monophilic group. Their relationship to each other and to vascular plants are unresolved. And so this continues. And so then there's seedless vascular plants under vascular plants, and they can be divided into lysophytes and petrophytes. And so bryophytes are represented today by 3 phyla of small herbaceous non-woody plants: liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. And so bryophytes refer to all non-vascular plants, and whereas bryophyta refers to the phylum of the mosses. And so bryophytes, sporophytes grow out of the archegina and are the smallest and simplest of the sporophytes of all extant plant groups. A sporophyte consists of a foot, a stetostalk, and a sporgangium, also called a capsule, which discharges spores through a peristome. Hornwort and mosses, sporophytes have stomata for gas exchange. Liverworts do not. And so these would be your gametophytes. And this is just a real life photo so you guys can kind of see what they're talking about. And the ecological and economic importance of mosses. And so mosses are capable of having diverse, and sometimes the extreme environments, but they're good for holding moist forests, or they're common in moist forests and wetlands. And some mosses help retain nitrogen in the soil, so it's not floating around in the air. And a peat moss forms extensive deposits of partially decayed organic material known as peat, and peat can be used as a fuel source, and it's an important global reservoir of organic carbon, so it's not like we're not having tons of O2 in our atmosphere. And the overharvesting of peat moss, or like a drop in the water level in these things, could make them release the O2 back into the atmosphere. And so this is peat moss right here. They're excavating it for the use of fuel. And then this guy was actually tossed into the bog, and he is so I think acidic, right, is what a peat bog is, or is it basic? I don't know. I just know that I know it's one of the two, and they didn't really talk about it, but yeah, the bog basically was thrown in there, and it's just nothing really lives in peat moss because it's just so extreme, and so he was well preserved and everything, and so I thought that was kind of cool. Ferns and other seedless vascular plants were the first plants to grow tall, and so bryophytes and bryophyte-like plants were the prevalent vegetation during the first million years of plant evolution. Vascular tissue allowed these plants to grow tall, and then seedless vascular plants have flagellated sperm and are usually restricted to moist environments. Origins and traits of vascular plants. And so the fossil of the forerunners of vascular plants date back about 425 million years, and these early tiny plants had independent branching sporophytes. Living vascular plants are characterized by life cycles with dominant sporophytes, vascular tissues called xylem and phloem, well-developed roots and leaves. And so this is the Sporgana, was what they were talking about back there too. And so life cycles with dominant sporophytes, it contrasts with bryophytes. Sporophytes of the seedless vascular plants are the larger generations, as in the family ferns. The gametophytes are tiny plants that grow on or below the soil surface. Alright, so basically, as you can see from here, it like starts its life in meiosis in the sporgana, and it gets dispersed, and so then the spore become these like young gametophytes, and so they're looking for like a mate essentially, or a fertilization, and then you get the zygote of the plant, and then it grows up into this, to a sporophyte, to a mature sporophyte, and then it spores itself out, and then it just continues the process. Vascular plants have two types of vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. Xylem conducts most of the water and minerals and includes dead cells called tracheids. Water conducting cells are strengthened by lignin and provide structural support. Phloem consists of living cells and distributes sugars, amino acids, and other organic products. Vascular tissue allowed for increased height, which provide an evolutionary advantage. So the bigger they were, basically, the more light in the O2 they could reach, or CO2. Evolution's roots, and so roots are the organs that anchor vascular plants, and they allow for the absorption of water and minerals and nutrients from the soil. And roots may have evolved from subterranean like stems, so like water plants and things. And this is just a picture of roots. I got really bored here. I was like, they need a photo. Evolution of leaves. Leaves are organs that increase the surface area of vascular plants, thereby capturing more solar energy that is used for photosynthesis. Leaves are categorized by two types: microphylls, which have like one single vein, and megaphylls, which have like a bunch of little branching vascular system. And so, and according to one model of the evolution, microphylls evolved as outgrowths of the stem, and megaphylls may have evolved as webbing between flattened branches. And so basically this would be your microphyll right here, just one single vein, and then this would be a megaphyll with all the branches. And so sporophylls and spore variations. So sporophylls are modified leaves with sporgana, and sori are the clusters of sporgana on the undersides of the sporophylls, and strobili are the cone-like structures formed from the groups of sporophylls. And so, and most seedless vascular plants are homosporous, producing one type of spore that develops into a bisexual gametophyte. All seed plants and some seedless vascular plants are heterosporous. Heterosporous species produce megaspores, which give rise to female gametophytes, and microspores, which give rise to male gametophytes. So it's like a cycle. Classification of seedless vascular plants. There are two phyla of seedless vascular plants, which is phyla Lysophyta, which includes your club mosses, spike mosses, and quillworts, and then your phylum Petrophyta, which includes your ferns, your horsetails, and your whisk ferns and their relatives. Alright, so the phylum Lycophyte, it's a giant lycophyte. Trees thrive for millions of years in most swamps. Surviving species are small, like herbaceous species now, so they're not as large as they once were. And club mosses and spike mosses have vascular tissue and are not true mosses. I thought that was kind of cool. And so this is going to be what like your spike moss looks like, or just that's the cluster of sporophylls. And then this is your quillwort. Phylum Monophyllida, and ferns are most diverse seedless vascular, ferns are the most diverse seedless vascular plants with more than like 12,000 species. They are the most diverse in the tropics, but also thrive in temperate forests. Horsetails were diverse during the Carboniferous period, but are now restricted to the ground. Asquarium and whisk ferns resemble ancestral vascular plants, but are closely related to modern ferns. And so these are just some ferns, and this is horsetail. This is whisk fern. And then the significance of the seedless vascular plant. The ancestors of modern lysophytes, horsetails, ferns, and ferns grew to great heights during the Devonian period. Devonian and Carnivorous forming the first forests. Increased growth and photosynthesis removed CO2 from the atmosphere and may have contributed to the global cooling at the end of the Carnivorous period. The decaying plants of these Carboniferous forests eventually became coal, and so this is kind of like what they're talking about. It was really just a really large forest that helped the planet like cool down and not be so hot for dinosaurs, and basically then all this became coal, which we use every day, and that's the end of that. Oh.